Veronica Franco was a young woman living in Venice in the late 16th century. She was known for her beauty, intelligence, and talents, but despite this, her life was full of hardship. She was born into a poor family, and her mother, Paola, a former courtesan, decided that her daughter should also become a courtesan in order to secure a good future for herself. At that time in Venice, as in many other cities, women without a dowry could not expect to marry a man of high society. Women who became courtesans were essentially independent, and although their profession was not perceived as something worthy, such women often had influence, wealth, and respect in society. Courtesans were not just objects to quench male desire, they were intellectuals, musicians, poetesses, and artists with whom male politicians, aristocrats, and scholars were eager to socialize. Paola brought her daughter into this world, teaching her everything she needed to become a successful and respected woman of this type. Veronica resisted this path at first, but soon realized that this was her chance for freedom and personal growth. Unlike most women of her time who were constrained by strict societal norms, Veronica was able to use her position to get what she needed. Not only did she fall in love with men, but she influenced their lives by gaining respect. One day, Marco Veniera, a young aristocrat she fell in love with, came into her life, and it seemed to be true love, but her position and lack of a dowry made it impossible for her to hope for a happy marriage. Her feelings for Marco were genuine, however, and her anguish was intensified when he left, having obeyed the will of his family, who had chosen him a bride of status. He could not be with her, even though their feelings were mutual. Veronica was worried about this, but despite the pain, her life went on and she didn't give up. The courtesan Veronica was not limited to only relationships with men. She used her role to dabble in art, poetry, music, philosophy, and politics. She socialized with scholars and artists, became a muse for poets and writers, and was known for her beauty as well as her intelligence. Her influence on men as well as her success in the cultural sphere attracted the attention of many influential people. She influenced the politics of the city, and her connections to great personalities secured her a place in the highest circles of society. But the more she grew in her role as a courtesan, the more she realized that her love for Marco was impossible. He was distant from her, and her life went on with no room for these feelings. One day, when the city was at the center of international intrigue and France decided to strengthen diplomatic relations with Venice, she was drawn to an important mission. French King Henry III was deciding how he would strengthen his ties with Venice. To do this, he needed a woman who would seduce him and secure an alliance with Venice. Veronica decided that she would fulfill this mission, but it was becoming an increasingly difficult choice for her. Her relationship with Marco was broken, and she realized that her actions were betraying her ideals. Nevertheless, Veronica decides to fulfill her role and seduces the king, securing an important diplomatic agreement. It was her act that caused tremendous internal conflict. Her feelings for Marco were still there, but she realized that her choice was her responsibility for the future of the city, and she could not back down. Soon Venice was at the center of a political crisis, and its fate was sealed when the king signed a treaty with the Republic of Venice. Veronica, however, was left alone despite her best efforts. Soon, an epidemic of plague broke out in Venice. The streets of the city were full of the sick and dying, and people began to look for those responsible. At this time, Veronica found herself accused of witchcraft and debauchery. The city's Inquisition held her responsible for the epidemic, and she was arrested. She endured terrible torture and humiliation. She was kept in a dungeon, interrogated to the last, but she never said a word, never gave anyone away. As her life hung in the balance, Marco returned to Venice. He learned of her arrest and was shocked. He decided to intervene and stand up for Veronica, even if it meant losing everything. At the trial, he stated that if Veronica was guilty, then all the men of the town were guilty, and so was he, because his relationship with her was nothing more than a manifestation of human connection, not a crime. These words made an incredible impression on the judges and on the whole of Venice. They were so powerful that they soon set Veronica free. She was vindicated, and her name once again became a symbol of strength, freedom, and dignity. Even in the most difficult moment of her life, she managed to stay true to herself and her ideals. Despite suffering and hardship, Veronica continued to fight for her freedom and her truth. At the conclusion of this epic, she was once again at the center of Venetian society. But her life was different. She remained an independent, strong, and determined woman despite the weight of her past. Veronica became an example for future generations, showing that a woman can be strong and independent despite all obstacles. She was able to overcome all difficulties, remain herself, and continue to live in this cruel world. Her story became an inspiration for many women striving to find their way and fight for their freedom and the right to be themselves. In the end, despite all the suffering, Veronica continued to be a symbol of independence and fortitude, inspiring those who faced injustice and despair. Her plight resonated with many who could not find their place within the strict confines of society. Veronica Franco was more than just a courtesan. She was a woman who proved that independence and fortitude can overcome any obstacle, and even in the most difficult situations, one can find a way to live by one's own rules. Her life, full of fear, pain, love, and loss, remains an example of courage and determination, despite all external circumstances.